when you say 2/3 have a drug problem, that's just an unbelievable statistic. You historically have really lived within the data. So tell the audience about it.
Cost of drugs in this country. Health spending back in the 1970s was about $74 billion. By 2000, it reached $1.4 trillion. As late as about 2023, our spending is about $5 trillion. The cost of medications has risen faster than just about anything else. Part of that reason is drug prices, because it's one that is going to take our healthcare costs. Only 40 to 50 medications get approved by the FDA every year. 90% of the drug molecules that are discovered never make it into the market. Less than 10% ever get approved. In that process, it takes a molecule between 10 and 20 years and up to $2 billion to be discovered and get into human body.
All right, welcome to the latest edition of the Scale Community podcast. I'm joined by Dr. Rahul Gupta, who I'm told I'm allowed to refer to as Raul. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Raul.
It's my absolute pleasure. Raul, the reason why I was curious and interested to invite you as a podcast guest is based on this recent endeavor in GATC Health. Is it pronounced correctly, GATC?
GATC Health, yeah.
GATC Health, okay. Which we'll get into in a little while, is in a really fascinating space, which is AI in clinical research. And so I have nothing but questions there to get into with you, but I can't help but start a couple of steps back, which is your involvement in government, and particularly the role you played leading the Office of National Drug Control Policy, ONDCP, which serves the White House, and you did that up until this year, so that's quite recent. Yeah. So lots of questions there, and I believe you're also a former commissioner of health. So I think we want to get into some of those questions as well. All fascinating positions. You've led a very interesting healthcare life and journey. So maybe we start with you being the director of the National Drug Control Policy for 3.5 years. And if I'm not mistaken, a lot of progress has been made there across the US over the last few years. So maybe give us a little bit of context to what your experience was like there.
Absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, Roy. I'm one of those few people across the country that has had the experience of Trinity. What I mean by that is having worked at city, county government, and then at state government, and then in the federal government at the White House. So along with private sector and academia as well, and nonprofit aspect of this. So I've really enjoyed every level, from patient care on the ground in rural America to, sitting and answering questions for the President of the United States. But I think what is sort of helps inform me in my sort of approach is the level of impact. It's very important. And we know from that perspective that the drug crisis, or the opioid epidemic, as we call it, has been one of the most significant, if not the significant, aspect of domestic policy in this country for well over 60, 70 years. And it has been very difficult to scale impact at a level that it is sustainable over time to save lives. Clearly, when I entered answering to the President of the United States in October, November of 2021, we were seeing 31% increases year after year in overdose deaths, which ultimately reached about 112,000 deaths a year. And beneath that number, that's, to me, is a tip of the iceberg. Beneath that number really is the number of people, which is about 49 million Americans, 1 in 7, that suffers from an addiction of one kind or another. So we have a large burden of disease, and this burden then translates into not just deaths, the value of life lost, the human suffering, but also economically. When we talk about today about bringing jobs back, manufacturing, well, who's going to do those jobs? Where is the workforce? When we talk about national security, this becomes an important aspect of a drug like fentanyl being able to be manufactured through asymmetric means, the irregular threat actors. So this is one aspect that takes so many dimensions and affects almost every aspect of American life, but also national security and economic prosperity. So what I did was, first, I helped do a predictive analytics. If we continued at that time to pursue the same policies that we had for literally over the last 70 years, we predicted that we're going to see about 165,000 deaths a year by end of 2025. Simple as that.
And it was heading that way, right? I mean, it was
Yeah,
climbing and climbing.
exactly. And if, in case, we were able to take evidence that was available and drive a sort of result oriented approach with resourcing appropriately to communities across the country, we could achieve the threshold of 80,000, half of that, by the end of 2025. So we knew the delta there. We knew what we could do and what an impact that would have on American life, but also other aspects of our country. We took that. And what we see now is reaching that milestone a year ahead of our predictions. So at the end of 2024, we've seen about 30,000 lives saved at minimum, 27 to 35% reduction in overdose deaths based on the criteria.
That's amazing.
Yeah, all of this for the first time in the history of United States has never been able to be done and sustained that way. And it's all because of making life-saving medication more accessible, making treatment more affordable, accessible, making sure that we have
and awareness. It helps to know that oxycodone, unlike what Purdue represented, is actually highly addictive.
Exactly, getting
and
the word out
dangerous.
to the public and making sure that they're aware of it. And at the same time, looking at the supply side as a business, as opposed to the quote unquote evil, no good doers kind of thing. Because that.
Well, tell me about that, because, I've done the reading, I've done the viewing, the documentaries, the Purdue story, the Sackler family is one of the more interesting stories you can read about. It's a 70-year history in drug manufacturing, good, bad, and ugly. J&J, Teva, I mean, these groups were all involved in this. They were all found liable to different degrees, mislabeling, misrepresentation, all the worst you can imagine. So where in this do you find salvation from a business standpoint?
Yeah, I think, look, I've testified in multiple litigation pieces which have ended up in, about 60 to 80 billion dollars in collection, which I consider blood money because people have died as a result of that, and we have to do the right thing with that money as a result. But look, at the end of the day, those like ones that have done it through prescription and prescribing, or those that do it on the streets, it is always a part of a business supply chain and business life cycle. We have to look at this as not just one or two individuals gone wrong, but an entire system of care that supports a sort of corrupt business practices using
everybody has a role to play. The FDA and
exactly.
what it accepts as the right drug description, the right dosage, the right warnings, the suppliers, the salesmen who are supposed to be well informed on the risks,
Yep.
the clinicians who are supposed to react to their patients. So it's just there's lots of culpability.
Absolutely, and physicians and clinicians become the learned intermediaries, and they're often used as tools to propagate bad behavior, bad practices, when not being aware of the entire science, except for a few ones that understand that right on the ground. So it's a whole system of care, which I will, tell you that kind of goes back to where our country is today. If you think about the burden of the cost of healthcare, is part of this is exactly because of what we're discussing.
So, I mean, what I look at if I do a quick chat GPT search, oxycodone is still a popular drug in the US. It's just the usage is maybe a quarter of what it was in its peak. And so it's a case of the drug has a purpose, a role to play, but in much narrower, more controlled cases versus we found the elixir, the cure for pain, and it's the right solution for everyone. Is that part of what you succeeded in doing, is sort of repositioning the drug for the appropriate use? And how did you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the important part to understand is that there are people with legitimate pain concerns, and they are sometimes dependent, good, bad, or ugly, on these medications. Although we know in long-term pain control, there's almost minimal role of chronic opioid therapy. We know that because there's so many other modalities of treatment, both non-pharmaceutical as well as pharmaceutical, available to manage that. But
What would be an example of a non non-prescriptive drug solution.
Right. So getting chiropractic treatments, getting physical therapy. There are so many more options available that are non prescriptive or non pharmaceutical. Yet, more and more payers use these less and less, historically speaking, now because it costs more money to do those as opposed to a doctor writing a prescription and having to have patient come back in 90 days. That's just cheaper to the system. And I learned that as both commissioner of West Virginia, but also in other roles. So there's this system that goes parallel, the capitalistic system of trying to make sure that we're doing things, but at the same time, we're looking at the bottom line. And the non opioid pharmaceutical options are also there that should be covered by prescription, without having to have clinicians go through extraordinary process of pre-approval and other pre-authorization and other things. So if we had a fair system that looked at the science and looked at what works, what doesn't work, we would not be where we are. Yet we find ourselves here on this issue. Still, we have to recognize that the pendulum cannot just swing the other way because too many people are harmed by that. We have to find a middle ground to help people who suffer from legitimate chronic pain while supporting good practices moving forward and understanding that pain is difficult. I mean, apparently we're the only community in the world that is consuming so many opioids as compared to rest of the world, rest of the.
I was gonna say that, and everyone who knows me knows that I'm a huge proponent of U.S. healthcare, but I try to be objective. Otherwise, what's the point? We did not score well here. So, in the case of opioid epidemic, 100,000 plus drug overdose related deaths per year. They weren't all opioids, obviously, but it led to such a spike. The closest you can come to with other countries that did poorly, Canada, Australia, UK, their opioid crisis is significantly smaller on a per capita basis. So we scored first amongst the whole world in a category that you really don't want to lead in. And so that is a time to reflect. Like, what is it about our system that can allow something like that? I guess the good news is when we believe that we have a miracle drug, boy, do we get it into the hands of a lot of people quickly. The bad news is if we're wrong, wow, do we cause a lot of harm.
I would say the same thing in a different way, which is when we go in, we go all in every
Yeah.
time. So once we get it wrong,
We did the same thing with cheap food.
Exactly. We go the other way around, and I'll give you an example of that. So once we figured out that quote unquote these bad doctors were having quote unquote these bad pain clinics, the law enforcement was very happy to, start prosecuting, wearing flap jackets, showing up at pain clinics, arresting the doctor, creating a spectacle. That's all well and good, except what happens to the 2,000 patients of that clinic, many of whom are having actual addiction in addition to chronic pain? So, what I saw in my time in West Virginia is they would often have the following option: A, find another practice. Good luck with that, because if your doctor got arrested, nobody will see you. Or B, go to the street and get alternatives and purchase them in the black market like heroin and fentanyl. And then as a result of that, we were seeing the consequence, which was so many more people were unknowingly overdosing and oftentimes dying and coming into the ER that way. Ultimately, this caught up. Law enforcement came to me as a health commissioner and said, is there a way we can partner up? Which is, when we are about to go to a clinic, could you send a letter to community providers to let them know that they're not going to be punished for any reason if they accept these patients as long as they're doing their job? So we worked, eventually we got it right, where we were partnering together like it should be originally. But again, we go in when we get in.
It's the marketing, it's the sales, it's the marketing budget, it's the access to care. We always make the case that we don't have enough access, but I mean, we don't in many respects, but in some respects, we actually have more than other countries.
Absolutely.
More clinicians, more trained clinicians, more practices, more volume, more spent. And so all of a sudden, that $5 and change trillion spend on healthcare looks terrible when you're spending it on the wrong cure that's actually making your population sicker. Your training in West Virginia, remarkable for this position that you took at a federal level, right? I don't think most people appreciate the drug overdose death per capita rate actually it's per 100,000 population, is 32.6 people. That's for the country. West Virginia, by far and away, scores worst here at 80.9. So it's 2.5, almost 3 times higher frequency of drug overdoses in West Virginia. And that's a recent statistic. I took that from the Kaiser Foundation. So boy, did you get a lot of training in
Yeah.
your position as commissioner.
Yeah, so one of the things I did, and it was since been replicated by dozens of states and local jurisdictions, was I took 1 year's entire population who had died. That's a gold standard of any study when you can take the entire N as opposed to in a sample. And we went 1 year behind their life before their death, after their death, almost in a CSI fashion. So we looked at not only their insurance, how many times they came in contact with the healthcare system, but were they married, how much they were educated, what was their type of work, entirety of their life. And we learned a lot of lessons. We learned that blue collar workers and those who were less educated was disproportionately impacted, especially if they were single and they were, more loneliness and more ability to be alone. We also learned that a lot of these people did seek out help before their time of death. It was the medical system that failed to engage them in treatment and other aspects of health. And then we created laws to sort of help making naloxone the antidote widely accessible, treatment accessible, and those type of things. So it's important to learn from, as I say, you learn from your dead so you can help prevent that from happening for other people, because you cannot treat when people die.
It does feel like for us to understand healthcare in America, we really have to appreciate that there are at least two Americas, right? There's the sick America and there's the healthy America, to be overly simplistic. But when you look at the stats by state, it does feel like you got the West Virginias of this world, you have the Maines of this world, the Mississippis, the North Dakotas, you have the District of Columbias of this world. Who else would I put in the category? Louisiana, Indiana. These states are consuming, in terms of volume, a lot more care than all the other states. They might not be spending more, because cost of living is much lower there, wages, therefore physician wages are much lower. But give you an example, hospital admissions per 1,000 population are like double. So hospital emergency room visits, double. These aren't marginal differences. These are different worlds. And it's always worth noting. I think we sort of intuitively sense this as a populace. Hey, we're not Mississippi, says New York or California. But it's not just Mississippi, right? It's almost half the country falls into one bucket and the other falls into another. And then you have, I was just speaking to Liz Fowler about this. You might know her from your White House days of CMMI. You have two very different worlds in terms of access to care for Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, where in some cases the access to care is comparable to other ethnic groups. And in some cases, it's wildly out of sync. You have like 50% of your Hispanic community doesn't have a primary care physician, hasn't seen a physician in 12 months or greater. And then the same thing with Medicaid. You have some states, certainly on the coast, where Medicaid coverage is very high. And you have some states where it's sort of there's almost no Medicaid coverage, depending on who's opted in and who's opted out. And so it's just the variance, the gaps are so wide. So how did you reconcile that when you transitioned from West Virginia to a national role? Did you continue to focus on bucket B, the Mississippis of this world, and you sort of left, the high performing states alone, or you weren't really looking at it from that lens?
Well, we did both. One hand, we wanted to make sure that, for example, naloxone, the antidote, was not available in all kinds of places across the U.S. That includes the Native American and African American population, but it also includes a lot of mainstream other places as well, especially where there are high overdoses levels. South side of Chicago, for example, or Mass and Cass area in Boston, or the Tenderloin community in San Francisco. It just depends on because one place you can get a lot of volume and a lot of lives saved that way if you can resource these countermeasures very quickly. At the same time, keeping an acute eye as to that disparities that exist across. So I'll give you an example. When I looked at the 100,000 deaths and did the analysis, 25% of those, That's 25,000 people are dying every year right after, within days or weeks, they're released from jail or prison from overdose. So then I looked at those numbers. So apparently, every single day there's 2 million Americans that are in custody, incarcerated across the country. Now, here's the number: two-thirds are on there because of their addiction. Two-thirds.
That's unbelievable.
And what do? As a community, as a country, we've decided to lock them up and literally throw away the key. I mean, that's the captivated audience, if you think about it, and we can treat them. But treatment in jails and prisons is very sparse and it's uneven. So as a result, when people are not treated, they come out and release into a community. What happens? They go back to their older community on the streets often, and they overdose and they die. And a lot of these people are between 25 and 44, prime working age. For that age, number one killer is the opioid epidemic. So what we did was, I said, we have to create a Medicaid solution. So we had over a couple of dozen states that have applied for Medicaid waiver, where they can start Medicaid 90 days before release, before discharge in the community. And that way you have transition of care, warm handoff. You have people being treated in jails and prisons. So when I went around and talked to people who are on treatment, incarcerated, they would often tell me, I'm not coming back. I'm going to do this job or that job. They were getting their master's degree, bachelor's degree, and they were really thinking about getting to the next level in life, as opposed to, I have no hope left. So these are the opportunities for our marginalized population across the country, which become our workforce. They become the strength of this country instead, if we decided to go that way. And that's exactly what we did.
It is interesting. We've actually traveled quite a journey since 2008, when incarcerations peaked. This was the worst of three strikes, you're out, where pretty much everyone and their cousin was going to jail. So we're at much better numbers today. And the rehabilitation program, I think, again, it's going to vary state by state and levels of investment. But a lot of lessons learned there, and a lot of good being done there, that I think as a society we would all sign off on the successful case studies. But still, plenty to disagree about, plenty of political strife. What is too generous? What is too forgiving? What is too strict and too punitive? And it just that friction remains. Maybe it's a good thing that different parties pull in different directions, and the experimentation continues. But no doubt that the role of drugs within all of this is immense, if not sort of primary. When you say 2/3 have a drug problem, that's just an unbelievable statistic. So you historically have really lived within the data, and so you leave your administrative position this year and you transition into GATC Health. So GATC Health, tell the audience about it. It seems to be in maybe one of, if not the most interesting space in healthcare today. What was the catalyst that led to that? Clearly, the business is heavily data reliant. So from that perspective, it seems a little familiar, consistent for you, for someone who's already engaged in predictive analytics. But give us the story of GATC.
Sure. GATC is 4 codons of your DNA. That impressed me, first of all. But when I left the White House, one of the...
Did I say J? If I said J, forgive me. It's G. GATC Health.
But one of the things that was sort of driving my decision for next steps, with having some options, was, hey, where can I make the most impact? And let me share a little bit, which I think you know this, but this is important, worth mentioning here. This is about cost of medicines, cost of drugs in this country. Health spending back in the 1970s was about $74 billion. That's it, only $74 billion. And by 2000, the health expenditure reached $1.4 trillion from $74 billion. And as late as about 2023...
Is that dollar adjusted or is that nominal?
No, that's actual, I believe, at that time.
Okay. We need to dollar adjust that, but go ahead.
But as of 2023, to get to closely to dollar adjust, our spending is about $5 trillion. So now let's look at the 3 big factors where this happens, if we think about this, right? So the 3 large factors where spending happens is, number 1 is obviously, we can say, hospital systems. Number 2 is physician care. And number 3 is the cost of medications. And the cost of medications, if you look at the data, has risen faster than just about anything else. And part of that reason is And every president, no matter which party, has talked about this, about lowering drug prices, because it's not only a driver, but it's also one that is going to take our healthcare costs into literally eternity if we don't address it. And why is that, if you think about it? Well, that's because, only 40 to 50 medications get approved by the FDA every year. It's also because 90% of the drug molecules that are discovered never make it into the market. Less than 10% ever get approved. In that process, it takes a molecule between 10 and 20 years and up to $2 billion, $2 billion to be discovered and get into human body.
And most people scratch their heads going, where is all that time and all that money going? And what I see is, firstly, everyone involved in this space is incredibly expensive because you're talking about the best of the best, right? P's, 15 years of study.
Right.
You're talking about a long list of hospitals, physicians that are involved, researchers. Nothing is cheap here. This isn't $10, $15 an hour labor. But what's really the killer is the difficulty in execution. And for me, that typically resides around coordinating trials, human trials. Once you get to the point where you're coordinating human trials, that is awfully difficult to do. And you need to do it in multiple institutions to demonstrate to the FDA that it's not just a one location fluke in terms of the data, probably an international component to it. How do you attract patients to participate in clinical trials? How do you attract physicians to participate in clinical trials? And normally that is a multi-year activity. And while you're doing that, you're trying to keep a business afloat that generates no revenues from that product. This is all pre-commercial. Right. So the odds are against you. This is going to be lengthy and expensive. So now you show up with this new business called GATC. I've perfected and you say, I'm using AI. How does AI cut into a 10 to 15 year timeline and a $2 billion spend if you still have to perform patient clinical trials?
Yes. So all of the work before phase 1 human trials, we call it preclinical. That includes not only drug discovery, drug experimentation in lab, traditionally, and animal testing. And it turns out animals are really
the lab work. The lab work.
And it turns out that animals are really very poor examples to relate back to humans in terms of would this work or not. Yet that's all we had for so many years, and that's all we've used. Now,
monkeys and dogs and mice.
Exactly, and mice also. While we're at it. And it turns out that you can actually do all this work. You can create digital twins of humans with human biology and human physiology completely in silico on computerized platforms. And you could discover these molecules almost one a month instead of taking so many years. And it could cost a few million as opposed to billions of dollars. So what happens here? You can discover drugs, especially when we're talking about rare diseases and ultra rare diseases and orphan drugs and repurposing of those drugs that are failed. You can get this moving faster. You can lower the cost and increase access very quickly. It's almost like science fiction. So what the company does...
So just to be clear, so it's at the preclinical trial stage, drug discovery, that AI is really shining, but still leaves you with a long tail, right? The drug still has to go through a lengthy trial process, still have to deal with comments from the FDA. So we're not going to launch drugs within a 12-month time frame anytime soon. But discovering the drugs compresses that initial period of time and offers really interesting new drugs that otherwise we would have missed. Is that fair?
Well, that's part of the business, right? So that is exactly fair, and it's part of it. So we have what we call a multiomics advanced technology, one-of-a-kind platform that transforms the medicine and technology alike. So it's uniquely designed from ground up. So it's the future of predictive healthcare, and I'll explain in a minute why. It merges advanced neural networks and machine learning to simulate human systems biology. This is not a mere evolution in technology. It's actually the birth of a new era in how we approach this. So what the platform does is not only allow the discovery of these new drugs, which a lot of biotech companies are doing, but what we are now able to do, we can take any drug molecule from any company. So if you take a molecule today and it will take all these years and all of this money to go, and then you might find out it may work, but 90% of the times you're going to find out it doesn't work. So all of the biotech and others who have invested this money, what happens to them? Well, they go belly under because what happens is they have to take out loans, they have to take out debt in order to do these expensive human trials, Roy, as you mentioned. And if we know that 90% of times they're not going to be positive yielding. And that's the
That's interesting. That is very interesting. So you're getting rid of a lot of the failure that might take 10 years to reveal itself as failure.
Right. So
failed spend, waste of resources, FDA distracted,
yes.
And yet you never got past phase 3.
So here's what we did. We asked University of California, Irvine, and they took 2,000 molecules approximately of drug molecules, those that had passed and those that had failed. And they blinded them and put them through this MAT platform of GATC Health. And what they found was that the platform can predict with 86% sensitivity and 91% specificity the ultimate success of that molecule. This is not even going through human clinical trials. This is only through platform. So now we can predict from discovery of the molecule with a high level of likeliness, as opposed to taking a 10% chance of success. We can give that molecule a 90+% chance of success.
Because it's running many more calculations of potential outcomes and then organizing through those potential outcomes.
So we're simulating the human physiology, the human body.
It's grabbing much more data
to
be able to evaluate that. Okay.
So what happened was, there's a company called Lloyd's of London. They have the Medical Consortium International that provides insurance to biotech companies against their debt. So they ended up having an exclusive contract with us as their underwriters.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's how GATC Health is differentiated from a lot of other sort of like-minded.
You've become the standard. I love it.
Exactly. So it becomes like your credit score in so many ways, right? So on one hand, on the other hand,
you're like the Moody's. You're the Moody's of drug discovery. I love it.
And it becomes a revenue company. So it's producing revenues.
And in the meantime, you're discovering your own molecules as well and your own drugs.
Exactly.
And so once you discover them, are you then championing the drug through the phase 1, 2, 3 trials, or are you offloading and selling that drug onto other clinical research organizations that are better positioned to manage that more expensive and timely part of the process?
So we like to say we are not a pharma company, but we will take the molecule as far as it needs to go unless someone wants to take it and partner with us. So the first molecule of the 13 molecules we have, this is another reason I was attracted, is a unique molecule to treat opioid use disorder in a very novel way. And we have sort of manufactured this compound in a lab. We have a 10,000 square foot lab where we've manufactured this compound. We've run animal tests on it. It seems to do really well as predicted so far. We are working to take that for investigation of new drug application and hopefully start human clinical trials, phase 1 next year. And we are basically democratizing the drug discovery process. So what we're often working with various collaborators, investors, and others to say, if you want to invest in this drug, you're welcome to for equity. So this is not, GATC does not have to own the molecule if we can democratize the ownership as well as the success of that particular molecule. So we have 13 molecules so far that are there in various phases of development, all the way from conception in clinical development to application for IND. But we're also looking at a way where more and more of institutions and individuals can own part of the molecules so that it becomes not just a property of, profit-making machine, but actually lower the price and increase access of novel treatments out there for Americans.
How does GATC differentiate itself from other AI early stage lab alternatives? I mean, I imagine you're not the only one. I once walked into a meeting at Deerfield, the hedge fund private equity group, and I was expecting just a normal office environment, and they had an entire floor with a large computer in it. Large is not the word. It reminded me of IBM in the 50s, the mainframes. And they said, meet our clinical research AI tool. So if they're doing it, others are doing it. How does GATC hold its hand up and say ours is special?
Well, first of all, we are the only company that we know of that does that, in that we are able to, if you think about the frame right now, I like to sometimes look at things in a broad sense. Like, if you think there's tech, then there's tech bio, like GATC Health. And then there are biotech companies that discover molecules and others. And then there are pharmaceutical companies. So we're one of the very rare tech bio companies that not only discover molecules, but also are able to validate and then work with our academic partners. So if you think about it right now, we're talking about, funding cuts, NIH and others to academia across, and the academic areas are nervous about this. The fact is today that majority of the development of molecule happens in academic setting through taxpayers, yet only about a quarter of those actually ever get approved. So what we're trying to do is we're also having university accelerator programs where we will partner with university to take their appropriate molecules to the market directly and do the diligence for them, including validation. So that's another special area that we're doing. In terms of technology, yeah, we can analyze 400 trillion data points in less than 8 minutes. So we do have a very advanced technology that does this work. We have offices in Irvine, Salt Lake City, Morgantown, West Virginia, Washington, D.C. But it is unique in a way that bringing solutions not in terms of only drug discovery, but also predictability in the molecule, and then designing that precision aspect as well.
All right, so my last question for you, Raul, is forecast out 5 to 10 years from now, which must seem like an eternity in the age of AI. I imagine each of us taking 100 different drugs on a daily basis. They're all amazing, and we're all living forever. And none of us have any medical conditions because these drugs are so wonderful. What am I getting wrong here?
Well, Roy, I think that is pretty ambitious. Look, I do think that.
Well, right now, some of us are taking no drugs.
Right.
Those of us who are taking drugs are getting very mixed results. So walk me through the paradigm shift here that AI and drug discovery will lead us into.
So I think we're in the analog version of pharmaceutical care right now as we speak. I think where we're going to get into the digital version, where these digital twins are those that are actually predicting the best medication that will work in terms of precision medicine, meaning that each individual will have not only, you think about the ability to customize medication. Today, if you have blood pressure, you go to your doctor, they first diagnose it, they prescribe you a pill. You come back in 3 months and you say, well, doc, I'm having a little cough with it, and they'll change it to something else. You come back another 3 months, you'll say, well, I'm having a little constipation. And so ultimately, in about 12 months, you get the right medication.
A lot of trial and error.
Yeah, up until the time you realize it's not enough, so I have to add another one. We're getting to a point in the time frame in the future where we will have very precision medicine guided that will be able to help know right there and then. It will save time and energy and cost right there. Secondly, and it could be a lot of.
It's also worth noting precision in dosage.
Yeah, exactly.
How many errors are made in over-prescribing, under-prescribing?
That and combination pills. I mean, today, if you have someone with heart disease, 3 or 4 medications they all have to take. Yet they have to take at different times, different doses, and different amounts, and then I have to fill them. So what happens with the adherence part of this, the compliance part? It's not, and then we end up consuming more healthcare because of that.
I'm going to need an AI robot to take my pills for me.
So no, I think we'll end up, because a lot of these drugs are not in combination, unlike other countries, because we haven't done the trials or the analysis to understand the effect of other adverse events and others. But now we can. So AI will develop a much more precise sort of medication regimens, newer drugs, faster and cheaper, accessible medications for people. That just hasn't been the case for a lot of people across this country. A lot of folks and we think of this as a racing against time. And we have a drug right now for glioblastoma multiforme, which is type of brain cancer, that we're sort of rushing to move forward on because we think this is important. Same thing goes for PTSD.
Of course. You're going to save lives with these drugs.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Dr. Gupta, I want to thank you for your time. What a fascinating discussion. What an amazing journey you've had. And I'm really excited for what's coming. because it's guys like you. It really is holding the torch for the rest of us. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me, Roy. I really appreciate our conversation as well.
Thank you for joining us on Analyzing Healthcare. Stay informed and stay inspired. Don't forget to subscribe and visit scale-community.com to become a Scale Community member. Until next time, keep exploring the ideas that shape our healthcare systems.